This is Creativity Drill with Dr. Don and Jonathan Rundman.
Hey listeners, thanks for tuning in yet again to Creativity Drill with Jonathan and Dawn Rundman. I'm Jonathan, and we're glad you're listening. Today, our guest is theologian, philosopher, and all-around lovable and irreverent and incredibly bright dude, Tripp Fuller. It's rather a crazy episode with lots of stuff going on mentally. So hopefully it'll be challenging and interesting and insightful for you as you ponder your creative journey. So stay tuned for the always entertaining and inspiring and downright lovable Tripp Fuller. Hey, we're rolling here, everybody. And our guest today is Tripp Fuller. And even our children are here, but they're going to go in the other room and
zip the lip.
Oh, you just heard one of them. We're talking about playing with army guys, actually.
Now, what's this?
Tripp is pointing to the contraption that we have to hold up our computer because we're recording on a laptop that's over 10 years old and the screen is broken. And so if we don't prop it with something heavy, the screen falls over.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought this was like...
It's a vintage film projector.
Yeah, but I thought there was going to be like some really sweet story like, well, you know, so-and-so, their first movie and blah, blah, blah. Like,
it's also a source of inspiration because you can think of things like that. And it's also a beautiful piece of equipment.
Industrial gear, right?
Exactly.
The triumph of design.
Wow.
So we're here this evening with Tripp Fuller, and you are in town for some business that we'll talk about in a little bit. But can you give us sort of the compressed CV of who you are as a just in your vocation?
Well,
so our listeners know.
Let's see, compressed version. I'm a theologian. I do podcasting, a competitive home brewer. I try not to suck at parenting. I think I've gotten better at being married, and I'm ordained. I do the communion and baptizing thing. Try not to bore people during sermons. And, that's...
And you're a musician, too.
But that, yes. So, one of the people whose previous guest said that, like, you know, they like things happen in batches, and songs are like that, where like once or twice a year, then I'll write like 9 of them, and then a month later find out 2 are good. But you never know when you had them because you love them like your babies, except you can fall out of love with the songs faster than your kids.
That's right. And you're also kind of a writer of sorts and an editor.
Yes. So, well, I'm writing, a dissertation, which my goal's that if I get 10 people to read it, I may be paying people later. So
I had a colleague who put a $20 bill in the dissertation that they filed at the university's library because he thought if anybody reads this, they deserve it. So
I know, it's like...
It might still be there. Who knows?
You haven't gone to check.
What is your dissertation going to get you? A PhD in something?
Yes. Philosophy of Religion and Theology at Claremont Graduate University in LA. And I'm also working on the Homebrewed Christianity Guide to Jesus for Fortress Press. It's Homebrewed Christianity is the podcast, and it's a book in a series of 10. And it's about Jesus, surprisingly. That's the that you don't know this, but like 2 years ago, I because I work at a church in LA, you kind of have industry people around all the time, and at a lock-in we came up with an idea for a sitcom, and then I got to go like pitch it at all the Adult Swim, Comedy Central, and Fox and all that kind of thing.
Wow.
So that was another writing thing that was fun. I got offered a job that apparently, if you wanted to live in LA for less than the college students get for a work study, was a great job, entry job offer. And I thought to myself, like, you know, I had friends who were like, I can't believe you got offered that. That's such a great opportunity. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to happen when I go home tonight. The Tripp, what did you do? Oh, it was great. I got a job offer. Really? Yeah. You know, minimum wage is not necessary, apparently, when writing. So there's that. But I grew up in art magnet schools. And I did theater. So from 6th grade on, half your school day is basically theater. When like my senior year, some of my friends and I won the American high school theater competition, and our one act, which we were not allowed to perform, I'm still a bit bitter about this because we were now in college, was performed at the Edinburgh Theater Festival because we won the...
in England?
Yeah.
Wow.
But, like the high school one act competition, the under 18 one,
wow.
If you win it, then you go. But then it was like a bunch of people that were under us performed it. And I feel like I was the only one that could play Santa Claus, who was manically depressive with a drinking problem. And the substitute just did not have it in.
You were robbed of your opportunity.
I know.
To live in that role. Well, I will say that if my mom listens to this podcast, which she will at some point, I think she would be confused by the list of things you just listed when we asked, what is your vocation? Because it is so many things. So she'll figure it out. I'll explain it to her if she needs me to. But what in your life, who in your life, or what have you read in your life that really has given you permission to say, I'm going to do all these things, and all of this is going to be who I am?
Well, growing up, I was a preacher's kid, but my family were church planners, which I think means that when you have an idea, you kind of take the entrepreneurial gusto and then go try to figure it out. And I think that's part of it. The other is, in our family, if you asked really good questions, then you got like book recommendations. Then after you read it, mom and dad would argue with us about it. So like growing up, like if you asked a good question about the problem of evil or divine sovereignty or whatever it is, those type of questions, then you read a book about it. And so that kind of like questing for an after truth bit was there. Everyone in our family plays music, so it was kind of assumed. 6th grade is the first time my dad let me play with his band. Like, he was the minister that also had a band that played in clubs, and that was tons of fun. And he wrote songs, so I figured that's what you're supposed to do. And then they work real well.
What kind of rock and roll music was played in the house when you were growing up?
Oh, well, it was basically 1968 to 1978. And we went on a road trip once from North Carolina and Raleigh to all the way across to Estes Park, Colorado, then up to Chicago, then down to Abilene, Texas, and then you take the southern route all the way back around North Carolina. And we stayed at KOA's in a pop-up camper, and it was like me and my brother and my cousin who's 3 years older than me. Brother's 2 years younger than me. And we counted how many songs my dad remembered from 68 to 78 before he repeated one. And he had passed 150 before he repeated one. That's because someone at one of the stops like requested it.
Wow.
And like you would name a band, and then they're like, oh, Buffalo Springfield. And then there would be like 6 songs that he remembered that just kind of came out. I do not have that memory at all. I forget songs I wrote. I forget songs I played 6 months ago. I have to reinvent words all the time because I thought they were there. Dad had them like just stored.
Did you ever think music would be your career?
Yeah, until I had to pay for my own health insurance.
Now, Tripp, when I met you, it was last fall, and Dawn and I were out in California where you live, and I was playing a gig, and Dawn was speaking, and you were there, and afterwards, we got to play some music together. And, of course, when I met you, I only knew you as kind of an academic and a scholar and a podcaster and all this stuff. And then when we were playing music together, you played, and I was just thinking, holy cow, you just have this beautiful voice and you're this killer guitar player, and like, wow, you're like the real deal musician, sort of lurking underneath all this academia.
Well, I have this theory, like when I retire, I want to get a B3 organ, and because I played piano a little bit, but I want to learn it just playing like a Stones cover band.
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel like if you're like the guy that has a B3 and then like the Leslie speaker,
yeah,
and if you have a pimp beard, it's all grown down, I can play with 30-year-olds that are like still like, vibrant human beings, and I'm like 70, but they're like, look at the old man in the back with a beard and the Leslie.
when you played and I was there, I realized that you're kind of like a soul man.
Oh, well,
how did that happen? Is it because you're from the South?
I don't know. My dad sounds just like John Denver. Like crystal clear.
Wow.
Bing.
Yeah.
and my brother, who's a lot better songwriter than I am, he has a very different voice. Mine, I have the volume and range of my dad, but it has a dirt to it.
Yeah.
Do you have a vocal doppelganger? Someone you sound like, or that you can sound like if you manipulate your voice a little?
If we're doing cover songs, sometimes I do attempt voices because it makes them all more entertaining. Especially like if it's Stones or Dylan. Green Day's always fun. Sometimes it's fun to see what Billy Joe Armstrong would sound like if he sang romantic ballads. That is, or sing songs, their Green Day songs, in other characters. But that's where you can know when I went to high school, right?
You're a '90s child.
Mm-hmm. Counting Crows was like my favorite band. There's probably still are. Counting Crows and Ryan Adams. And Bill Mallonee and the Vigilantes of Love probably occupy half the music I listen to, and then everything else kind of rotates around it.
Yeah. Wow, that's cool. I remember we talked about Bill when I visited California in September, and Bill should be on your podcast, and he should be on Creativity Drill as well.
He's been on the podcast a couple times. My favorite, I interviewed him about music and stuff, and then one time he was going to be in LA, and we did a podcast on like July 4th weekend, but it wasn't July 4th, and it was like a storyteller's backyard concert, and that was a whole bunch of fun. My problem with going to see him is like I really know all the words, and if you're doing a house concert, I sing way too loud to really right. Like it's not like I have like a soft voice, so he's just like, Tripp, be quiet. But there are whole albums of his that are favorite ones of mine. So
did that musical root of your youth inform your academic life? I mean, Bill's lyrics, obviously, Dylan's lyrics, that Counting Crows, that August and Everything After. I mean, these are songs that are delving into theological wonderings and imagery for sure.
Yeah, well, and what I find about that period, like the songs I'm attracted to are ones that are like become optimistic by being brutally honest. So like as opposed to naming some hope that's unrelated to your present situation or context, or try to convince yourself that your situation's way better than it really is. It kind of puts the brokenness and ugliness of things on display, and then lets things happen. There's Bill Mallonee uses sacramental language when exploring relationships throughout his song catalog. So like broken love relationships, he uses sacramental imagery, holding newborn babies, all the way to watching your kid or loved one struggle with addiction, and these kind of, like, I love to take the way he takes this image of like the brokenness of God giving God's self to us in our need, and then puts it into the middle of our lives. So he picks up that theme. Adam Dirks, who's a songwriter for Counting Crows, he has some kind of personality disorder thing where he's like, the couple interviews I've read, and you never know when a musician is telling the truth or performing themselves. And I feel like he says he forgot which one it was. Right? Like, so there's a difference between like watching someone and you're like, oh, it's Ziggy Stardust, and then what happens if they forget.
You mean the persona he's putting out?
Yeah.
He'll kind of lose track of which is the real guy.
Right,
yeah.
Right, like that image, and so like in the second album, he begins these conversations about like just how constructed are we? Could you be an artist where people hear you and not be turned into a product, and where your relationships become like something you use to get places, and that was when he was dating all the chicks on Friends.
Yeah,
and which again, that's a historic date.
Yeah, in those days, he was kind of famous for dating like all the most famous women in the world over a 12-month period or something. Yeah, when he turned 50 last year, and then still had the dreads. That was a moment, like for a moment, I had to like pull down like
just take him down a step or so. I feel like at 50,
Time to lose the dreads.
but I don't want him to, because at this point, sometimes when you go to concerts and everyone knows the words and you're going to sing a song, like, you're like, no, you better perform. This is my nostalgia moment. I did not come here to actually go back to middle school, just to go back to the feeling of it and go, life is not nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be then. When I said, like the end of, anyway, there are certain lines of it that when the song comes up, it goes back to a moment.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that funny how art can represent a period of your life, and when you encounter it again, you're immediately brought backwards to that place where it came from in your history.
Yeah, and smells.
Emotional life. Right. The brain circuitry that's active. The pathways that you formed as a youth listening, they get reactivated. That's pretty cool. Do you, when you think about being a theologian, when you think about being a creative person as a songwriter, what kind of interplay between those two constructs do you experience that I think some people might think being an academic type and reading theological works by major theologians of the last however many centuries, along with biblical criticism, how does that have to do with being a songwriter? Or I think what hasn't come up in the conversation yet is that you also happen to have some amazing skills working with young people. And one thing that really struck me when we were visiting and speaking and performing last fall when we were in California is the number of parents of youth who approached me and told me about you. Mm-hmm. And the connections that you made with their young people, with their kids who were adolescents. So I'm just wondering what kind of interplay you see that seems like you have a pretty unique angle on it between being a theologically minded person and being a creative when it comes to music. And I don't know, maybe that helps with meeting youth in the middle, because they're coming to you about like those creative music things, but also you've got some theological wisdom to impart.
Yeah, so one of the things I always think is, for most endeavors that become like projects of your life or something you give yourself to, there are like two different ways of engaging it. One is like, we just listened to your new album once, and like, that's nice, that one melody was neat, right? Like, and that was a really neat melody, and I said it. And then you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, after you've listened to it 50 times, then I'm going to be more interested in what you're going to say, because one listening, you're not going to pick up all the intentionality and the work and the things that go with it. You don't know the whole story behind the song, but until you sit with it long enough, you're not going to like have a kind of openness to get the whole depth to what's going on in it. And I even remember, like, I'm a huge U2 fan, and it wasn't until I read the U2 book that because I was too young when it happened.
That big, huge hardcover book?
Like
it's just called U2?
Yeah.
That's an incredible book.
Yeah, and it wasn't until I read that about being in East Germany when recording the Achtung Baby song, like when I read that, all of a sudden that album became completely different to me.
Yeah.
Even though it's one of my favorite albums.
Yeah.
And like he tells the story in it about they're trying to get together. They have this weird place. They can't find vibes. They're like all mad and hating on each other, and they just can't even get the groove. They get the invitation from the Dalai Lama to play the Freedom Tibet thing. The one concert, and Bono wrote back, no, we're one, but we're not the same.
Huh.
And then they had like this epic 40-minute jam session, and bits of songs from the next 6 albums all were in this giant jam session.
Wow.
And it broke through and it was there. Now you can hear it when you, like, after you heard the story, then that's there. So to me, like, scripture's that way, theology's that way, a life of an adolescent, which is scary as hell for adults to get to know, because you have to then remember that you were like that. Like, we have these service relationship to things, and then if it's your project or if you're into it, if you give yourself to that quest, then even like a Taylor Swift 7-year-old fanatic with 9 different Instagrams to all follow her and like all of her pictures there's a deepness that's going on there, just like someone who investigates the history of interpretation of Jeremiah 18 in the Middle Ages gets a relationship to the text that's completely different than the one person who heard you preach about it at the end and it's like, wow, I don't think God was going to really change God's mind because I don't think God changes. And you're like, that's nice. That's what the Bible says there. But like, there's not a real response to give if you're only going to talk about the melody on the surface or another Swift fan or this is what the Bible says. Like there's a depth thing there. And I figure like the art part or the creative part or the thing that Schleiermacher says kind of holds all the humanities and everything together is also what holds religion together. It's also what makes any of our knowing and our activity human. It's that moment where you kind of cease to be the one who's acting and doing and thinking and processing, and you become passive, or you kind of have this guttural depth thing happen, and you're no longer the one who's determining what's being given to you. And
you mean in regards to the creative process?
Yeah, but I think it's true about anything.
Yeah.
Like, he would say, like, Kant comes up with this image of the human as like thinking ones, and then you're doing. Uh-huh. And if you're trying to fit religion, art, and all that stuff into thinking and doing, then if you call art a doing, then, I know there are some people that are way better guitar players and melody writers than you two. And they could complain that they used the effects pedals repeatedly and made a whole career out of it or whatnot. But if you ever hear them play, you look at them and go, yes, and 90,000 people from 40 different countries are not going to get together at the Rose Bowl and sing your songs.
Yeah.
You want to know why? I don't know the answer, but I know that the answer is something like your knowing and your doing are unrelated to what happens.
Yeah, there's a mysterious undertone.
Yeah,
happening.
And so Schleiermacher looked at people who were dissing religion in his speeches on religion to the culture despisers and said, you don't sit there when you're looking at a painting and go, well, that blue that over there is a little bit different than the other blue. And so they didn't really do it right. You don't sit at an orchestra and go, one of those is out of tune, right? Like, that's just not what you do when you're there. You don't sit when you're holding your baby and go, I'm glad that sperm and egg connected. Like, the account of what's going on is not like you explain it away or you explain the processes. It's something that gives itself in a very deep way. And he calls it feeling, but in German it means way more. Uh-huh. It's more like the gut dimension.
Wow.
And I think that any investigative project, quest, has those moments. It's just art is where we learn it today. Like, it used to be, where was that mystery and depth preserved? It was art about the biblical narratives, right? Like, if you walked around medieval Europe, uh-huh. You saw the best art, heard the best music, the best orators. They're all church people. Yeah. But I think that as religion got more antagonized to the Enlightenment, and you have this like push against intellectualism, you also are having human beings discovering that they're actually agents of creativity and depth. That's just part of what it means to be human. Then the place that all that happens wasn't always a church or always our narratives, but now it's kind of like, in order to defend or protect ourselves as Christians, we're tempted to deny that part of us and want a very surface version of religion or a surface version explanation of something. We want to say it's about knowing this, mm-hmm. and it's doctrine, or doing this and acting the right way, when those are like outworkings from it. And you even get like, Jesus is not running around telling anyone what to think, and if you don't do it this way, you're wrong. Mm-hmm. It's those are like secondary issues, and that was kind of the connection for me, was growing up getting asked, you ask a question, get a book, you keep wrestling with it, you think about it, you get a script, and then you sit there and go, well, what was my character doing before I got on stage? Where am I? How do I put that emotion up when I walk on? What do you do when you go off? Or how am I open enough to everyone in this improv thing that we can do something together and not humiliate ourselves when 200 people are watching us respond to note cards with fart jokes, right? Like that, whatever it is, when you give yourself to that thing, mm-hmm. that you're doing, involves a type of vulnerability and openness to the world that I have in lots of different places. To me, the religion has been one of the study of religion and philosophy of religion has given me the Christian tradition back in a way I really love it. Yeah. But it's not like, therefore, if you ask me why we're born to suffer and die, I'm going to just tell you Bible verses or something. there are plenty of places that we probably have shared songwriters that explore it, or you'll have movies or transitions in life. There are lots of places like that. And when it goes to the teenager bit, I think really it is attending to their story with the sincerity and authenticity you want yours attended to. And parents are scared to do it because they always have this temptation to want their kids to like essentially perform at being the right thing. And anytime you're obsessed with your performance, it's probably not going to be nearly as good as if you're at home with yourself during it. And I mean, and you know that you can tell the same sermon preached in different places. One time, the minister, it's clear that she owns her space. She owns the text. She's in relationship to the people there. And but the very same words could be said by a different minister in a different context. If the guy's insecure, not open to what's going on, you're like, that's the worst sermon in the world and the best sermon in the world. And why is it that the church tends to look at the people who've been given the teenagers have everything crammed at them and told, here's the world in a real narrow way. They're still asking questions their parents don't permit themselves to ask anymore. They're still experiencing beauty in ways they've never experienced it before and responding to it. They're experiencing intimacy among friends and everything in ways they didn't before. To not attend to that and treat it seriously ends up trivializing the very things you want them to have when they get done.
I love this talk about vulnerability and intimacy between people through the arts. And I think that, yes, theology has a special way that can talk about those things in a great way that a lot of other parts of life can't really address. And like, boy, and talking about art from a theological viewpoint, even I can feel myself sort of getting embarrassed internally because I so desperately want to play ball with normal musicians in the normal music business, or quote unquote real artists in the real art community. And I'm so like paranoid over the years about leaking any of my theological motivations or start points in my own creative life. I'm just and even in recent years, I've had other artists like verbally berate me or disrespect me because of those roots of my own story. And so I think as I've gotten older, I'm increasingly paranoid about that. But I can't help but feel deep inside that, boy, when you're having those moments of deep community and vulnerability with your audience as a performer, or if you're making art and people are taking that art into their house, into their life, and this, it's hanging on their living room wall,
or even just listening to you while they're stuck in traffic.
Yeah, or it's music, it's the soundtrack of their life. I mean, or if they're in my audience and we can all feel that communal energy vibe that is so beautiful and transcendent. For me, that's a theological moment, even if the audience, it's not a churchy thing, even if they're not there for spiritual reasons, but it's this undeniable thing that happens in the arts between the audience and the artist. And so I'm trying to get over that embarrassment and that paranoia of not wanting to look like a religious Bible banger or something, and
definitely.
It's just so hard, but I just feel those waves of embarrassment in my own inside because I so desperately want to be taken seriously by normal people, here's
it about locating, like when I talk to people, I always have to decide, am I a philosophy student? I pick which one of my hats I want to have in a conversation. But I wonder, with some of my friends in LA that have, over time, they got to know me, started listening to podcasts, and come to live shows, and then interact with whatever you would want to call the general vibe of what we do. But so a couple of my friends are writers for very popular TV shows, comedy writers, and they came to one, and Rob Bell was there, and he was one of the guests when we were talking. And after it, they told Rob, have you ever thought about preaching? And part of it was just realizing this is just a completely different universe. They're not even in it at all. Yeah. They were like, I might want to give this guy some affirmation. Tripp's friend that was here with him in the brewery, that you might be a good preacher. And I think that part of it is like early when they see you, they want to locate God. I think conservative people tend to want to locate God as a way to protect God from whatever the other stuff is that's going on. But if your concern is not locating God, where God's like something to be protected, then you can kind of just go wherever it goes and expect God to show up in whatever way it happens, but not need to like think like you're somehow defending God by making sure there's this really religious thing in it, or but sometimes this story that everyone knows around the emotion is like a story everyone knows, and it was in the Bible. Like there's a what was his name? He wrote Weak Thought, French atheist, political philosopher, but he's also Catholic. And they were like, well, why are you Catholic? He's like, you know, I'm from Europe. Everyone's a Christian. And he wasn't meaning it like in a negative way. He's just saying, no, if you don't know these stories, they're the ones that shape all the West. You kind of have to know the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures. They inform us even if you aren't aware of it. And that was one of those moments where I was like, oh, I think that's a really good way of beginning conversations around it, just to say like, what artist takes off the biggest narratives that have moved people for thousands of years in the West just because your grandma scared you with hell, or some dude on TV who's like a homophobe, and you therefore think like I'm passing up on that Abraham and Isaac story, like I'll just invent a new one that's models. To me that's my question was, do you think that people are seeing when it comes up as you being aggressive or wanting to like keep God in something, or is it that the art community ideologically is just opposed to locating yourself in a community or a tradition?
Are you asking me specifics or hypothetically? Are you asking me about my experience?
Whatever you want to answer.
Oh, well, I guess the experience I had was about me and my own biography that I was,
How dare your grandmother's a church organist?
That is, I mean, you know everyone's in charge of where they were thrown in the world. Isn't that one of those things that blows my mind? Like every time someone, Tripp, you did grow up in the South. Yes. And guess how much control I had over it?
Right.
Yeah. Like if you were born 200 years ago in Turkey, you would not be you.
Yeah.
Right? Whatever you are is not an option. And so like our thrownness and arbitrary existence in the world is like so much there. Like our options already dwindled significantly the moment you wake up as a human being.
Yeah.
So stop pretending like we were like in a vacuum somewhere and we're choosing to piece ourselves together in this abstract perfect human. No, like even the notion that you're somehow that autonomous within the culture is a myth of our kind of anti-enlightenment Western individualism, which kind of comes through hyper-Protestantism, like meets capitalism, and then you think that you could turn your identity into something to be purchased and performed and probably discovered by what you like on Facebook. Like that stuff just really frustrates me, because if you just ask them, well, what would have happened if you were born in Saudi Arabia? You know what? I would be the crazy liberal right now. That's what would happen, right? Like, and it is no evaluative statement about us. To me, it's more like, how do you inherit the richness of the tradition you were given, the blessings and the curses from the family you're given? What is it that you're doing with it and bringing into the world? And that question, right, is an art question. The other one seems like real arbitrary. That's about your history that you are in charge of. And if one of the things I've always thought is that art gives someone the ability to see the accidents of their history, which they aren't in control of, as grace. And also it gives you the courage to actually see reality as it is and not be overwhelmed by it. And so art in a sense is a protest to all the forces that kind of want to shrink and dwindle us. And when art becomes some way you wage ideological battles, it's real irritating. Not that everything's not propaganda. It's just if that's what you're turning it into.
Yeah.
Then an image or a terminology, I guess, I've been thinking of as you've been talking about this is you've provided so many incidents and examples of receiving rather than acting or doing, but receiving the music or receiving the art that you're viewing. And that is such a different meaning when I think about that type of receiving versus a consumer. One who also, you might argue, receives, but in a very shallow way, in a way that they're consuming, whether they're watching something or they're eating something, or
being worthy of something,
or being worthy of something, and just the depth of the receiving that you were describing is so different than sort of the stereotypical American consumer who watches all the TV and consumes the media and that sort of thing, and that receiving is something that when we open ourselves up to that, of receiving what it is I see every single morning when I walk the 5 blocks to my bus, for example, and seeing that every time it's different, and I have my ritual and I see the same houses and some of the same people walking their dogs, but it's a different thing than just, I got to get to the bus, or I don't know, just this idea of consuming.
Yeah, and also the way you talk too reminds me that the stuff we're receiving, let's say the art we're receiving, or the inspiration or the beauty that we are receiving, that beauty and that art, it has wild abandon. It's just kind of out of control, like a tsunami through the universe. And it's beyond, it's just rolling in a beautiful, powerful, out of control, awesome way through life. And we can be aware of it and just be over and be smashed by it in a great way. And it doesn't, there's a freedom to this thing that we're receiving. Does that sound like, what does that sound like to you?
Well, Heidegger, when he talks about authenticity, now it got popularized by like beatniks and stuff. And then where you have B-ins, yeah. Well, I mean, like being authentic of this buzzword, like what Heidegger actually observes is, I think, really helpful. Like, yes, events of authenticity happen, but honestly, like the most authentic person's still inauthentic 90% of the time, right? Like existence is mundane, repetitious, and this kind of thing. And we either can have this desire where we want that authentic thing, and so we end up purifying everything around us. We turn our relationships into only places where we get this moment, this insight, or we this desire for the real or whatever becomes actually the means by which we justify all sorts of violence to everything around us. We think that somehow when you shuck the world down, there's like this one little kernel of zesty awesomeness at the bottom. And Heidegger's point was not like, oh, let's sit here and now let's just be. But no, like he chose to hang out with dudes that worked and cut down trees in a forest rather than listening to lectures. And the reason wasn't because, I'm trying to be like a snarky professor, but in the sense that like authenticity, that moment can happen amidst everything, be it like our walk or you played the same song 13 times and then it happened the 14th time. It's like a fissure thing. And what I think art ends up doing is allowing us to start relating to our world with kind of and we have an anticipatory relationship to it. And the best art puts it towards the things right in front of us. Like escapist art makes us assume that there's some like outside intervention that will finally let us open up and feel at home with ourselves and the world, or save us from it, as opposed to the ones that like give you the world back, but with a bit of splendor on it wasn't there. Like picking up chicks at a bell choir. You know what I'm talking about.
That sounds like a song.
It is. But like, why write that song? Well, like, because there are lots of people that I bet there are more people, the relationships that started at a bell choir than a lot of other places, right? But the Beatles didn't manage to get around to that song.
Yeah.
And there's something so specific about it that it catches that weird moment where you're falling in love in really weird places. Mm-hmm. And in its specificity, it actually has a much more universal applicability to it, as opposed to, let me describe generic love. And what do generic love songs sound like? Something no one's ever had. Nice.
Do you think that your theology can be stated in a sentence?
Well, this is actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you. So I had this idea, I don't remember when, but I came with the metaphor of playlist, right? Like, the best way to figure out something about teenagers is to see which songs they played the most. And whatever songs you played the most say a lot about either why did you have that, what do you like about it, all that kind of thing. And so I started using on confirmation retreats the playlist imagery, and you create the playlist of the sentences people say about you the most. Now, in it, you end up finding like you're not good enough, you should do better, I can't believe you. All those things, parents, teachers, coaches, friends, you're not that pretty.
Are you saying these are the things in the playlist that you were seeing kids actually
that the teenagers are putting up? We do confirmation. I think you should be able to drive and get pregnant before you decide to really be a Christian. Jesus tends to look at it like an adult religion, and that discipling thing was like, let you take ownership. And so the beginning of the whole confirmation is like a 4-day retreat where I try to talk them out of being Christian. And then if you still want to, then you kind of sign a covenant to do the process. But the playlist thing is there, and it's amazing. So like, I realized in the process of it that half of the problems we have, like either things we feel guilty about or the shame and all those kinds of things, are all tied up in things we believe to be true about ourselves that aren't true. And what God's good word about us is not the one we think is most true. And I say all that because then I made playlists, like during confirmation we make a playlist of what God says about us. And so the playlist are the lines I use regularly in sermons or teaching or anything. So if you were asking like the one sentence one, is that God knows your name, knows your face, and cares, is the one I use all the time. And it's my first line in benediction every time. As we go, let us know that God made the world, knows your name, knows your face, and cares. And then you get the Jesus line and Spirit line based on the gospel text of the day and then the call out. But anyway, so then the group comes up with their playlist. And then we use the playlist when we're going to exegete text and stuff back, like we're reading a text. Normally you dismiss it like, why are we reading this junk? Apparently God wants to slaughter large numbers of people. But then one of the rules is God has to at least be as nice as Jesus. So then why would we have a text in here? Anyway, so I wondered, like, it's worked real well, but I have no idea why. Like, having the group come up with its own playlist of like the things that if you ever think Team Jesus, these few things are the ones you have stuck in your head. I mean, kids are in high school, like you do the 16, they'll be like 23 now. They'll email you about a problem or something, and just sometimes it's hard to remember that no matter where I am and what I've done, God's with me and for me. And that was their confirmation line or whatever it is.
So putting it in that format gave them a way for their brains to hang on to it.
Yeah, like and when you think of the schema.
Yeah, because when you think of, y'all are Lutherans, when you think of the gospel playlist and the inside of Luther, the blessed exchange is when you trust that God's good word about you in Christ is the one that's true, and then all that God has is yours and yours is God's. And so like having the playlist of the gospel and the ones that we carry with us became a. But what is it in? You're a brain person. This is why. Oh,
before Don gets brainy on us, like, so what I'm thinking of as you talk is like, could it be that the musical soundtracks of our lives that we create for ourselves, and the art that we surround ourselves with, the films we watch, the books we read, the poetry we write at 3 a.m, could these be ways for us to build little shapes to hang moments of truth on? That otherwise would be too deep to remember, too hard to figure out, too complex to express. But if we could put it in a playlist, or we could paint it on a canvas, or if we could watch it on film, we can cling to those easier in our brain.
Yeah.
Does that sound...
Yeah, I mean, why do you think, like, the Jewish people perform the stories every year? It's like... And when is it that all your family and all your tribe gets together? It's not for the slaughter of the innocents. It's for the birth of Christ, right? Like, that's what we do. Christmas isn't where we remember Herod killed large numbers of babies.
That's the next week.
And that's when we're all not there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's always an interesting, when you're developing Sunday school curriculum. Okay, what do we do about this? Because you have to have something for that Sunday, even though most people aren't going to have Sunday school, but we emphasize the refugee part rather than the slaughter.
What's funny
it's
is
a
like
challenge.
when I did the TV show we pitched, the second time we came back to Fox and pitched it was when Seth MacFarlane came, right? And so you're in a room and I knew him, but I didn't know him. My buddy, who's like a writer, is freaking out because he didn't know he's going to be there, and he's like, "No, this guy's really important." Blah blah blah. And he's like, Family Guy's like, "Oh yeah," But so in it, he like goes, he likes it. He's like, "So all right, so what would you do for like your Christmas special since you're religious?" And the show is about is a coming of age middle schooler rednecks in a trailer park. It's called Legends of the Park. And anyway, so like they are always come up with really weird ways for the sixth grader to finally all the boys to finally hook up with the one hot eighth grade girl that's like legs are at their face. And they found out from one of the high schoolers that girls will like cuddle with you when they get scared at movies. So her dad's a TV preacher and the only real preacher in town, but they have a cable access show. And so they volunteered to help with the living nativity. And it goes through, but at the end you actually have the slaughter of the innocents. And like they have like the dolls and they're like using chainsaws and junk on it, and just so he could like try to get the girl to like hold his hand or whatever when she got scared. And I mean I was dramatically telling the story, and he's like, "Well, where did that come from?" I was like, "No, that's in the Bible." I was like, "This is great. See, everyone will get pissed, and then they'll go look, and it'll really be in there." Like, Herod straight up just slaughtered a bunch of 2 and unders. It's in there. I was like, no one can get upset if you add the Bible to a children's thing. And it would be like the only way this Christmas episode would have more Bible verses in it than Charlie Brown. And that one did well.
Yeah, that one did fine.
Yeah.
This is what I'm curious about. Now, you are not from Hollywood. You are from the South. And then as an adult, you find yourself living in Los Angeles and surrounded by some pretty heavy hitters in show business. And I don't know how you feel about it as someone who's not from there, but I'm totally not from there. And whenever I go to LA, or New York for that matter, or Nashville, I feel energized and inspired. And I know other artists who hate LA and who hate New York because they feel like it's just like a dog-eat-dog scramble for attention, and it's just a big schmooze festival, and it's just like, who can I use to get a leg up or climb the rungs? And of course I get that's going on, but I'm never discouraged.
There's not a lot of like Finnish folk music competition, and like you're like you show up and all of a sudden you're like, I am number one.
Right? Yes. Well, I've never been discouraged by the showbiz communities. In fact, I always feel energized, refueled, inspired to know that I'm in a community with thousands and thousands of creative people who are passionate about their work, who believe in their vision, who are working and collaborating and trying to do something cool. Like, I think it's great. Like, how did you feel when you moved to LA?
I enjoy it, but I know people that have both experiences. I mean, living at the beach is different than living in the city. So you kind of decide when you want to go in, and you're at a place where a lot of people that work in different kind of creative industries and stuff live and then drive in. So, here it comes, the bubbles. So I enjoy it, but most of those conversations that are around stuff like that were different opportunities you would never think happen unless you happen to have a certain person as an elder at your church, or one of your neighbors is this, or at the coffee shop you got in a conversation with a sports writer and then realized that it was a sports writer and they thought your jokes about the Lakers were funny, and then they're like, hey, you got any more of these? And you're like, actually, yes. Or you're like, I got asked a couple times on helping with religion jokes, or like, is this really true? Especially during when Romney was running, a lot of comedians were like, Mormons are funny, but you can't say the wrong thing. You don't want to be wrong, and if you just Google it, you never know which are really true.
Sure.
They're like, about that planet. But so, like, there are little things like that where it happens, and it's fun. But I think, like, I wasn't like in an industry where you're somehow competing with the people that are there. You're like their weird friend who's like a nerd and is religious and something, who you have your own little niche of interviewing philosophers and theologians, and and then you're like that. You're both creative. Stuff happens.
Have you found that in the industry town like that, it really is who you know, and it's about relationship networks?
Oh, yeah.
That's how it seems.
No, I mean, it's definitely like that.
And I've heard too, just reading interviews and listening to other podcasts with show busy people, that they say, if you really want to break into, let's say, the movies or the Hollywood industry or Nashville, for example, you have to kind of pack your bags and move. Because, once in a while somebody from Indianapolis is going to break through nationally, or somebody from Minneapolis or from Orlando. But really, if you want to play ball, you got to move to where everything's happening. And I always think, as I've learned, as my own career has gone on and on for over 20 years now, I think if I had a different story as a young person, and if I just knew more, and if I wasn't romantically inclined, I would have packed up and moved to LA, I think. Or Nashville. I just would have done it, and I might have
just
done
for the
in
Neil
retrospect.
Young song.
Just for what's the Neil Young song?
I'll pack it in and
Oh yes,
buy a pick.
Oh, beautiful. That's the opening song in Harvest.
Take it down to LA.
Yes, exactly. But of course, I didn't, because I was more romantic than I was driven to show business. And so I would rather marry Dawn than go to Hollywood.
Well,
but I think if I hadn't...
It's reasonable.
If I hadn't been so romantically motivated, and if I had had a clue, I think I would have done it. And so if you are listening to this podcast...
I've heard people that have different, depends on the industries. Mm-hmm. A couple of my friends are stand-up comics, mm-hmm. and their advice was always, if you're a stand-up comedian, mm-hmm. then don't show up here until you already have another city you play in.
Right, until you're, become the king of your own town.
Right.
Yeah.
That way you can, show up, make no money, and do 15-minute bits all the time.
And you've got tested material. That makes sense. But they do say, you have to start in your own town and become a big fish in a small pond. But you can't. But then eventually you got to move.
It's amazing when the people that do it late, because if you're going to go through all the groundlings classes and everything to finally get where people watch you that might watch you and think
you should be on Saturday Night Live. Or,
that kind of thing. Some of them just there's one of my friends. She grew up in a conservative evangelical place, got married at 19 or 20, and then got divorced at 25. And then she moved out at 28, and she's doing that whole process. And she's like, yeah, it's definitely meant for young people.
Uh-huh.
Because the sheer volume of work and everything you do.
Yeah. And maybe the energy level it takes just to stay up all night long and to sleep on couches. And if you're 35, that's harder than if you were 21.
Oh, it also sounds awesome if you're 21.
I want to ask one more theology question. And then I want to talk to you about podcasting, because I have a feeling that some of the people who listen to this show have their own podcast or would like to start one. And you are a pro, so I want to ask about that. And I have a couple other things as we wrap up our show here. But I was thinking, in the theology business, as you are, and in the academic world, a lot of times, in many ways, it seems to me, you're talking about the creator, or a creator, and the creation. Mm-hmm. So your whole business is surrounding creativity. Mm-hmm. And I hear this language sort of in churchy circles and in books I read, and then even I listen to some of your Homebrewed podcast myself, and I'm interested in this idea of when the creator is making the creation. There are a couple ways to think about it. And one of the ways would be that the creator has to withdraw mm-hmm. himself, herself, to make room for the creation, mm-hmm. and allow the creation to exist in a vacuum where the creator withdraws. Or I suppose then the argument against that is, no, the creation itself is created within the bounds of the creator, and there's no withdrawal happening. Mm-hmm. What's the theology of that in the relationship between the creator and that creator's creation?
Well, the notion of withdrawal is actually comes from Jewish mysticism, where the image of what was prior to anything existing, like having beginnings and endings, there would have been nothing other than God. So, like, how does a world come into being if God's all that's there? Mm-hmm. But if the world is different than God, which the creator and created distinction it kind of implies, then how does it happen? Well, the images that are in the Hebrew scriptures are rather rich, a bunch of different ones. They have 2 different creation stories back to back in Genesis. If you keep the intertestamental works, there's a number of other ones there. There are creation hymns and psalms. There's a bunch of different images of creation. So I always think, like, when you're asking a question, like, don't kind of like have to pick one version of it. Right. Think like whatever the activity is that God with some intentionality is invested in that brings about over billions of years people that sing songs and make love, then you switch your images to ones that work all the time. It's not kind of an either or one, but the making space one is a spatial imagery for God giving the possibility of genuine relationality. If God doesn't vacate in some sense, then God's own will remains permanent there, and love requires freedom. Mm-hmm. And that means for God, creation is a risk.
Yeah.
That's
the image that really rings with me, that I get a lot of energy from, is the withdrawal thing, and to say, I'm going to step aside intentionally to create an other, mm-hmm. so that there can be risk and danger and vulnerability and choice, and choose to enter into a risky love, self-giving sort of exchange. Mm-hmm. That excites me. Well, but I of course get that, that's one way of looking at it.
But it's important to get what all the perks are of that image, right? Like, you could, if you're thinking like in classical theology, you're going to push back at that one because risk would imply that God might feel change or something like that, which is less than their notion of divine perfection. So that's why the image was minimized. That's why for Christians, you get a notion of creation out of nothing. Now, I mean, if you've read the Bible, you're going to have a tough time finding it. But like in Hebrew scriptures, it starts with one image of there being this nothingness there that God's invested in and hovers over the water, and it grows into this complexity. And then eventually it's no longer God saying into this deep that God's over, let things come forth, but God says with the plants and the animals, like, let's bring this forth. So like even in this like 6 days, you see a shift from God working with this mysterious no thing, this formless matter that God invests God's creativity in. More complexity comes into being that then ruptures through a whole nother stage of possibilities, be it day and night, light, land and water, and all these plants, and then animals, and then human beings. That this growth of divine investment eventually has an other that co-creates with God. Mm-hmm. So when you get to what would be the line of like life, biological life, you actually at that point see that God's co-creating all the new things with the creation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so like that image is another one that's beautiful. It connects to dots like that, with the kind of stepping back one.
What's the news in this kind of talk for people who are writing books, making paintings, writing songs, writing scripts? Do you think that we as creative people in the human realm withdraw a bit of ourselves to make room for something new that we are birthing? Or do you think that just the nature of us, that all we can do is create within ourselves with our presence fully woven inextricably from the creation?
Well, I bet you have moments of both. Right, there's sometimes the best thing you can do is let it go. Have you ever had a song where you had like 9 verses and there was clearly that you could not do the song without all 9? Like I turned in, like, to my band back in the day, I would walk in with like 9 verses, and they're like, you can't have another song that's 9 verses with 4 chords. And I was like, the music is more of like the stage for this song. It's not so much a song; it's more like melodic ranting, and you aren't going to get the interrelationship of perverse top-down power from the existential problem in the first verse to global capitalism at the end, unless you play out all the things in between. I remember Matt, my guitar player, and he's one of the most creative, intelligent people I know. It looks at me and goes, Tripp, I have no idea what the hell you just said. But here's the thing. We're stopping after the fourth verse. You can decide if you want to add another verse and talk during the guitar solo, or sit there and sing it a cappella while we put our guitars and walk off stage. But we're just not going to do that. And so then I was stuck. What am I going to do? Blah, 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 blah. And then I ended up rewriting all the lyrics. The song got way better, and I just let go of doing the whole original thing. Mm-hmm. And all my little things I thought were brilliant hooking between kind of got, and then this other thing came into being because you were kind of forced to deal with that other people that you actually let into your work, and now you're forced to actually listen to them.
So either you were your own editor or producer, or you allowed another person to help you with editing or production.
But that image, though, to me is one I find fascinating because a lot of the pushback is by Christians is that then, how are we supposed to know that God ends up winning or whatever? The moment you let the world, have this ownership of itself and responsibility and freedom and things, then, well, who knows how things work out? And if you can't just at some point, God just pull the trump card at people, then you never really, there's just no real assurance. And what's amazing is they want God to be the world's worst parent. No parent thinks that's the best version of parental power, right? Elgin, get up. You're going to school. If you get in trouble, I'm going to come there and smack you. You're going to enjoy this and blah, blah, blah. You can have them perform whatever. They aren't going to learn. Successful parents are ones who attend to the other and are persuasively influencing them so that they instill a love of wisdom, instill a love of respect for others and their neighbor and their friends. Successful parents don't pull the divine intervention coercive card. Mm-hmm. But for apparently perfect power from God is the worst parent. And it blows my mind because that image is you feel like you succeeded as a parent when the other one calls and goes, your kid was the greatest. Oh, really? Do tell. Right? And you're they waited till everyone's done at the meal and helped me take stuff and you're yeah, that's right. You didn't do that all the time with me, but something stuck, and you go, all right. But if you had sat there before now, when Jonathan and Dawn are done serving the meal, Elgin, you're not getting up. I don't care what Legos are in the other room that you're going to play with. You're going to carry the stuff to the table, from the table there. You're going to wash it off, and then you're going to ask them twice if there's anything else that doesn't. If you called then, I'd be finally he listened, right? It's a completely different thing. But somehow we have this desire, God, the infinite and all loving one, can't figure out how to use love persuasively to accomplish God's own means. That sometime God goes, well, I tried the Jesus thing, but now I'm going to bring the fury. To me, it's such a weird concept, but. It's you want to impose poor parenting tactics on God.
Yeah. One of our earlier guests talked about when they had a very busy artistic life as a single person, and then they got married and had kids, and now their art is still happening, but in a less frequent sort of way. And the guest on the show said, well, my art these days is parenting. And I'm hearing you connect parenting, creativity, and theology. And I know, and you're a parent, I'm a parent, and I find that my theological framework is really shaped by being a dad and having my own children. And I wonder, too, if being an artist is sort of like having a baby. And who just said that? One of our guests just said that.
Kelly.
It was I keep talking about Kelly Newcomer, who's also a very spiritually insightful person. But, making art is like parenting. Making art is being creative is like having a baby, and your creative life. You tend to and care for the art you make, and we use that language when we talk about the creator and the creation.
I wanted to ask you what a typical day in your life would look like if you could say at the end of the day, I had a creative day. What could that look like? There's maybe 4 or 5 iterations of that. but a typical day in the life of Tripp, where at the end of the day you can say, I've had a creative day. Tell us what that looks like.
Well, it's not the one I do emails on. I found like I'm really just like basically from like 11 to 3 in the afternoon, I'm more or less useless. So that's when I try to do things where I talk to people or return emails and that kind of thing. On wonderfully creative days, for some reason, I decided to stay focused, and it becomes productive.
But it's you've been able to identify that it's specific times of the day?
Middle of the day is just kind of useless for me. Well, for like focusing.
Sure.
It is not good. Now, before I started like actually taking ADD medicine, which I picked up way too late in life, I would at 10 o'clock have a second pot of coffee and smoke cigar for about an hour and a half while I did all things that could be qualified as busy work. So I would sit with my Wi-Fi in the backyard with a pot of coffee and drink 7 or 8 cups and smoke a cigar and do all the busy work.
Wow.
And then I would get on to other things. Mm-hmm. I remember mentioning it one time to my counselor, and he was like, "You do what?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's just like trying to get the stuff done." He's like, "So you wake up and have large amounts of stimulant so that you can pay attention to just doing tasks most people have no problem doing, so that eventually you can not need stimulants and enjoy being creative about whatever your random things are for the day." And I realized like I never plan what it is. Like I know during the week I have a few content creating tasks, and I just kind of wait till the moment happens where I can do it. And if I do that, it gets done faster. Occasionally I have to get into like real program modes, and that means like I just have to not engage humans. I have to I'll take Elgin to school, I'll take Cora with me, then we come back, breakfast, make sure Alicia's all good, and then I leave. And I don't talk to anyone, and I don't have internet.
Man, that's how it is for me. I love if I'm totally isolated with no people, I can be way more creative.
And if I'm gonna if I think I might get a text message saying, "Hey, can you pick Elgin up?" Or if someone from church has got permission to interrupt me that day, I'm just like, I'm not even starting. I'll get pissed.
Yeah.
And so when everyone goes to bed, I get lots of stuff done.
Yeah.
Like 9 to 1 is where most things happen that are like content creating type things. Mm-hmm. Now I can read I can't read boring books. I mean, by that I mean like fiction and stuff, but like philosophy books and things I can read in the day. As long as I'm not, if you get interrupted, I don't want to reread the same paragraph of Hegel 5 times. That's painful. I want to know what this says about me as a brain person. I think I listen at double and triple speed to books all the time. I can listen to it faster than I can read because I'm dyslexic, so reading is a lot more painful. But I will listen to like a philosophy book at double speed and just listen to 300 pages worth and take an hour and a half walking and listen to it. I listen to things a lot. Like I listen to mostly like religion, philosophy podcasts, and then Laker related things. And then people I enjoy how they do the activity of being on mic. Like other than the Laker stuff, like Colin Cowherd is my favorite of the sports people. But that's more just because he's really good at being a host. And taking positions, provoking thought, and endearing himself to you, even though he's saying things that you half irritate you. Mm-hmm. But I listen to that one more because he's good at it. Or like Mark Maron interviews, he's really good at interviewing. Yeah. So I like listening to it, but I would never interview the way he does because I have no idea. But I always am fascinated. Mm-hmm. If I like the person he's interviewing, I listen to go, now what is it he's going to do to get them to change directions from what they probably have said 1,000 times? Mm-hmm. But I listen to like stuff all the time, like in a day, because of the speed. When I do dishes, when I go for walks, and when I'm in the car, would add up to like 8 or 9 hours of talking.
Yeah, it seems like you've got a gas tank that's able to handle an incredible amount of input.
Well, I wonder if it's helpful or not. I know if I'm sitting there, I'm going to do it, but But I'm like, is it more problematic that I'm now like really good at receiving content at high speeds on a constant basis?
Well, you
it certainly
probably
seems like you're able to retain it and use it in a functional item.
Yeah, you must have a very rich network in your auditory cortex. Like at the brain level, you probably, if you compared that to sort of your visual processing pathways, you probably have a much denser series of networks of like listening and then organizing it and knowing sort of where you want to store it and then being able to remember it, compared to if reading isn't as speedy for you. It sounds like your neurons fire faster when that's how you're receiving information, is how I would, if you wanted to go to an MRI machine for fun. And
that does sound
see
fun, though. Like, I would go, here's the thing, like, so you say that in LA, if anyone says about their thing that you know that they're like kick-ass at and you want to know more about it, then I would just say yes, go, watch how you do it, and then sit around and ask you about it and go like, now what is it that is going on when someone's like, I'm going to check your MRI machine, when I blah, like, I'm always fascinated when I know someone's really good at something, like how they got into it, what is the questions that if you are in that field are exciting that no one else even wants to understand, and kind of figure them out.
When we were getting ready for you to come to visit Minnesota, you mentioned in an email that one of the things we could talk about on the podcast was you felt like you had some challenges in your creative life based on the fact that you were an extrovert. And you wanted to talk about that. Like, what were you wondering about that?
Like, even like the listening at high speeds, I always think like, if I stop hanging out with these imaginary people on the other side of the thing, like, would that be helpful? Like, would the significant periods of silence when doing dishes be helpful? Like, I process something. Mm-hmm. I don't ever feel like it will be, but I may just tell myself that. Or then, like, if I'm creating something, like I have, so for the different chapters in the book, the Fortress book, I probably have 2,000-3,000 words more than I can have in every chapter that, are chunks I write. Like, I'll outline the chapter in like 7 or 8 things, and then I don't write it in order. The chunk comes into my head for this segment, and then I go write it. And so, like, there's only one chapter is everything actually written, because 3/4 of every chapter is written. They're already all too long, but I haven't decided what parts are going to get in. And I usually don't decide it until I actually talk to someone rather significantly about the chapter. And usually in talking to it, I'll connect the dots of how I want to really arrange it. Then I'll go back in and play with it. But if I don't, like when I moved and wasn't in classwork all the time, I had to intentionally go find people to talk to that could read the books. Otherwise, I'm pissed. Alicia's like, you need to go have your friends that have read this. It's so annoying. Like, you just sit there, and it doesn't matter to you if you what's going on, unless you're actually talking to someone about it. It's going to be bothersome. And I like 30 minutes of it, not hours. So like always listening, and then to process, always want to process out loud with a person. Yeah. And if
I didn't know about your dyslexia and ADHD situation, but what I did know about you just from, and I don't know you very well, but it was just so obvious when anyone meets you, is that you're super academic heavy hitter, and the stuff that you're thinking about is like very rarefied kind of stuff that's kind of mind-blowing to a person like myself. And I wonder, like, what's going on with so many people with ADHD and with dyslexia who have extraordinary powers in other realms. Like, do you think that either you were because you had certain challenges that you compensated in a really hyper-functional way?
That's funny. So, like, I had failed, I think, 7 foreign languages and geometry in high school, and I had A's in like everything else.
Yeah.
And eventually, it was like senior year, beginning of senior year, one of the teachers told my parents, like, he might actually be trying at this. Mm-hmm. They thought I was lazy because I was just smart and could get good grades without trying other places. Yeah. They were like, well, what, maybe he has a learning disability. And they're like, why would he have one? Like, he's got the best grades in anything except something like this.
Yeah.
And they should have said exactly.
Yeah. But what's funny is like, is my parents are still like rather bitter and guilty that they didn't even think about it until someone else brought it up. And, And my mom was like, I even wrote referrals for other people. It's her own kid. She didn't even think about it. So like
the cobbler's children go barefoot.
Yeah. So I get tested. They tell me, and like in the explanation of Dr. Kearns was her name, explaining dyslexia, and I have a 9-year-old short-term memory. That's the other thing. I still get in trouble for not remembering stuff, and now I'm always like, yes, Alicia, but it's been diagnosed.
I'm sure she loves that.
Yeah, but so she said, like, what is it you're really into, and this kind of thing. Your spoken IQ is 40-something points higher than your written one, but both of them you're really smart. So it's only going to be something where this particular thing shows up. And dyslexic people with poor short-term memories have a hard time getting whole other languages into their long-term memory banks.
Oh, gosh, yes.
You're either going to move and live in another country, or you're just going to have to get over this. And so she said, like, what is it you're into? I was like, I like philosophy and that kind of stuff. And she goes, well, just read 2 or 3 hours every night and you'll get better at reading it. And think, you're going to remember it when you learn a thinker's system versus learning the details of a book. So if I get assigned something, I just engulf the material rather fast. And then once I know how the thinker thinks, I could turn it on. And could talk to you about someone I've learned their thought about subjects I've read or not read and be pretty good at guessing it. Mm-hmm. Just because my way of processing is you're reading to get the knowledge to have their system function in your head, not whatever, here's what Ponnenberg does in this one book with this one thing. It's more like, well, what's his relationship to revelation and history? How does he understand the apocalypticism of Jesus? How does the church's, you get the picture.
You have a strategy, a series of strategies, it sounds like, that helps you be really successful at the things that ultimately are more important than if you had just memorized everything on the flashcards of what, this word means this, and this is how you conjugate, or that sort of thing. That's really... That's really amazing and exciting that you've figured out what strategies help you do what you love to do.
I've not figured out how to make writing interesting. I find it the most boring activity of all time. And
you should just talk your thoughts into a translator.
And that's why you're
your book.
That's why you're a good podcast host. That's why you're a good preacher. That's why you're a good lecturer. You have a relational and verbal skill set for human beings to listen and communicate. So, yeah, that's cool. And it also reminds me of all the artistic people in the history of the arts who had similar learning and challenges with whether it's dyslexia or attention or whatever, but then became brilliant musicians and painters and thinkers. And
because things wire a different way, and you need that diversity of how brains work to have the breakthroughs.
I want to ask you something that's a little bit selfish for our own podcast's sake, and then we can wrap up the show. But, we were talking, I picked up Tripp today from his host where he's staying here in town, and I said, how many episodes of your show have you done? And how many did you say, 800?
Something like that. I mean, I've been doing it since 2008, and for at least 3 years of it, we've had 2 shows.
2 shows a week.
Yeah, but there's Theology Nerd Throwdown, which is Bo and I answering questions. Or live events, and then there's Homebrewed, which are the interviews.
Yeah.
And if, let's say, each thing has at least 40 episodes or whatever in a year, then you could do the math, and there's a lot.
So as someone who's done 800 podcasts, and you're our 8th guest, what's your advice for us or for anybody listening to this who loves podcasting and wants to have a podcast? Have you learned any sort of tricks with experience?
When people are telling me they want to start one, or... anything. Just go ahead and start. That's one.
Yeah.
No one's paying you, so it's okay if you suck for a year and a half.
Yep.
Make sure your topic is real specific. Don't go broad. Pick a niche.
Yep.
Who's going to listen to the creativity drill. Why? Because they're wanting to know.
Yeah.
When it says creativity drill, is it a drill that helps you become more creativity, or are you drilling into creativity? And... then you have the little catchy ditty, creativity drill. And then, that's who's going to be there.
Yeah.
And feel free to experiment with format until you find the one that works.
I mean, your show is very narrowly focused and very serious business,
yep,
and yet irreverent and fun.
The first 3 years, I had all my friends on that are normal, popular authors for Christians, right? Like, now there's a few of them that come on who are also the ones with PhDs. But I used to interview like everyone that was kind of progressive, evangelical, emergent, or mainline something or another's. And then I realized, you know what? I mean, they're my friends. If I'm with them, I'll hang out and talk to them and put them on or whatnot. But like, I'd much rather be like just super nerdy.
So your show has gotten nerdier and more specific. Even
you would have to work really hard to find like the before getting to that niche, because that was like I started before I even moved to California, so like 8 or 9 years ago or something like that.
And I would think, your show is talking about things. Don't you think you're like probably one of 100 people in the world who are into this kind of thing? It's super specific. So there must be people
specific. But then think of this: I beat Creflo Dollar last week in downloads. I mean, so we're always in the top 100 religion downloads. And if you go through and go, who likes Jesus, gay people, and wants to take care of the planet, it's like Christina Tippett's our challenge. And I say that because I always use that as an example to ministers. They go, okay, well, I don't know, but last week 60,000 people listened to me talk, and I can tell you how many live in your city because the download numbers are there. And have you thought about the fact that maybe people are listening to it because you have intelligent, creative, critical thinkers there that just happen to not have the same degrees? There are different styles, and some people like one and not the other. So our idea was not to like give the homebrewed version of something, but to interview people so they have ingredients to prove their own faith. And it's more like, I don't want them to all have Tripp's theology, just one that doesn't suck. So for years it was just the interview one. Yeah. And I one time did a show 3 years ago where we had done a series like 7 different, if you were a theologian, you would know them all, on recent Christologies. And then Bo, who had just started editing back in the day, who's now the other co-host, said, we were talking about him, and he's like, why you don't ever say any of this stuff on the podcast? I'm like, dude, I want other people to think. Like, I don't want to tell them what I think. Mm-hmm. He's like, they listen to you for hours. It might be okay for you to tell them what they think. You know what? They might still disagree with you. It's okay. Like, you're not going to break character if you just happen to talk. So then we did an episode after it where I kind of talked about what I liked and didn't like about them, like what parts of it are still thinking about, how I would connect things that didn't get connected. And then people liked it. Then I got in an online argument with 2 very famous evangelicals who applied the liberal label to people that aren't, because they were trying to demonize them. And I was like, I'm sorry, but I also like picking labels that no one likes and just using them. So I feel like liberal's cooler than progressive because it's like everyone hates it. And so if you pick that, or like process theology is a thing I'm into. No one knows what the hell that is. It requires learning a philosophy no one's ever really going to get. And everyone said it was dead. And so like, I was like, yeah, but I like it. And now it's like included in all kinds of stuff. And if you just type that junk into Google, I'm going to be on the front page of Google about it, not people that should be. And like if you type in famous people, on their front page is going to be crap of them talking to me. Like everyone should read all of John Cobb's books, but they didn't. So I wanted more people to find out about it. So like, to me, that was one of the things about like the podcast. It was if you're passionate about it, and then give people like the opportunity to hear you being passionate about what they're passionate about, and then it builds a community. And all the other shows and things that have developed out of it have more been ideas people from the community gave back. But don't remember, like, you have to have an audience before you do it. So don't try like having like a live show on the internet when no one watches. Mm-hmm. And have the same 2 people send you a call during it. Like, just not worth it. Mm-hmm. Because the coolest thing about podcasting is, like, this happens right now, and then 2 years from now, someone could have Googled my name and y'all's name, and they're like, oh, I wonder if they've ever met. And then this shows up.
Right. It's evergreen content.
Right.
Yeah.
So to me, that's one of the coolest parts about it. And like,
I think the format is a beautiful thing. for that evergreen reason. That's just one of many reasons why I think it's just it's just so cool. And cooler than live radio that just disappears in the ether, you know.
I just wish I had a cool jingle that fast like yours. Like the first
we knew that. I thought if we're going to have a podcast, we have to have a really cool
Well, it would
song.
be disappointing if you didn't, right? Like, but
I'm so glad you like the song because you're a real music fan.
But it's so catchy, and you're like, and when you hear it, I'm like, oh.
That's awesome. I'm so glad you like the song. Well, since we're wrapping it up here, can you tell our listeners, we've talked about the podcast, how do you want people to find you online?
Homebrewedchristianity.com.
And that's also the name of one of the podcasts.
Yeah, but they're all like technically under that.
That's your network umbrella.
Yeah, or trippfuller.com exists, or Twitter's my favorite.
Oh, yeah. Twitter's your favorite social media platform. Cool. Okay. So listeners, track down Tripp Fuller, and there's 800 hours of content with Tripp talking about theology and philosophy and stuff.
Here's something
will blow
that a
your
podcast would
freaking
be
mind.
cool. So someone will discover it a year from now, and they could live in South Africa and are driving back to Egypt from their seminary, and I got tracked tweets of a seminary student who listened like 36 hours of me talking.
Driving across the continent.
All the way across a freaking continent. Wow! Home to his parents from a seminary. Like, I've never even been there.
That's the magic of podcasting.
Yeah.
It's just downloaded onto that guy's mobile device. And off we go through...
but pick what place
Chad.
Everyone knows they can connect with you. Don't pick all of them.
Yeah.
Like, I am always will play around on Twitter, but I'm not going to friend you.
Yeah.
Unless I hugged you and you should see pictures of my kids, you're not going to be my Facebook friend. And that's okay because that's what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Like, unless I'm visiting a city, that I'll put podcast stuff up there if I'm visiting.
Yeah.
Because anyone I'm really friends with that's in Minneapolis, I'd want them to know I was going to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to, like, to me, figuring out, like, how you can connect with anyone that loves your podcast without them having to connect with your whole family tree.
Right.
So that you can go, well, here I really do these kinds of things. So I won't like tweet large amounts of stuff that are family things.
Right.
Yeah. That's good brand management.
Yeah, but I think it is important for people to know they can connect with you because, like, if they really enjoyed something and they tweet about it or whatever way you kind of advise people and ask. Most people feel like weird asking someone to do something, listens to their podcast. They chose to hang out with you for 90 minutes as opposed to watch some movie that millions of dollars were spent on. Mm-hmm. That they would have had to pay $20 to go watch something that long to entertain them. You just made dishes not horrible.
Yeah.
So there's no, like, sharing it with a friend or tweeting it, like, just realize you're doing something most people like that create get paid to do it. All you're asking them for to tell someone they like. There's no reason not to do that.
And that's
why people should all share this show with people because they're creative.
And they should not feel bad about reaching out to the creator, to the host of the show, to you, for example, because chances are you'd be happy to answer a question or respond or...
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, we have a whole show that's answering questions.
Yeah.
That only existed because people kept... Like, we set up a phone number, and I used to sing it. It's not our phone number anymore. Mm-hmm. But it would... see, if you find old shows, we had a Google Voice thing, and it was 678-590-BREW. But I would sing it every week in a different genre, and usually falsetto, like 678-590-BREW, and then like sing the whole a whole song out of it, and then we realized like you're gonna have to pay if your space goes up because people kept calling. Originally, it was like large numbers of jokes, like where we would play with people about it. Then people started calling in questions. Then you get like hardcore emails of people like being honest and dumping junk on you.
Well, yeah, I mean, because your content is going to bring out heavy-duty personal things in people's lives, and they want to...
Yeah.
You're not going to get fluffy emails.
No, but Bo and I are both ministers, so...
Yeah.
You're up for it.
And if we paid for like a demographic assessment. Mm-hmm. So this I thought was fascinating. So on the coast, our average age is 27. And that... of listeners. Flyover country, it goes up into the 40s.
Wow.
Flyover country, it's mostly liberal ministers or people that went to seminary and aren't allowed to like talk and think about this stuff in their congregations. And on the coast, it's like you're in seminary, you went to divinity school, or you're a religion major, or you're like a young critical thinker at a church, and they're like, churches have groups around the stuff we do. So it was amazing to me, like, to see in like the cities on the coast, we have this like young ideal target audience for things that, you know, people want to know about. And then flyover country, you're a lot of ministers.
Yeah.
And then like the retired hippies that are the ones that, you know, like Marcusburg and Crossing go visit all the time when they do their like tour type things. Mm-hmm. They just like eat it up, and they're the ones that call like, I really like it, but I skipped the intro because it's a bit irreverent. And and you're like, my bad.
Well, listeners, please go find Tripp Fuller online and listen to his podcast.
Yeah.
And because there's plenty to invest in. Oh, and you're also a resource. You're a speaker. You're a workshop guy, right? You hit the road sometimes.
Well, it's what I'm doing now.
That's what you're doing now. And you like that? You want people to call you and invite them to your...
On the Tripp Fuller page, there's like a speaking and doing the podcast live places and all that kind of stuff.
So people could invite you to their city. You could speak to their group. You could set up the mics to record a homebrewed podcast right there in their town.
I can do a lot of things.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Well, we have a question we ask every guest, which is, what would you tell your kindergarten self?
Well, I've thought about this.
What do you tell 5-year-old Tripp?
What would I tell other than you're dyslexic?
Do you think it would have been helpful to know that and have a diagnosis earlier?
Well, I don't, maybe just in the sense that I'm like super competitive and think like if I knew earlier, then I would do other things. But like, then you get all memento about it.
Right. And now it made, not knowing made you the wonderful ball of love that you are now.
Nah, that's what I like to hear. But I think the main thing I would say is like I thought about how you would say it in a way that the 5-year-old would have any clue what you mean. And so, you know, that's different. Uh-huh. I have no idea what I would say if I wanted them to get it then. But if it was like those scenes in the movie, like, you know, the movie Signs where they're like, just swing away and you're like, oh, what's that about? Oh, aliens and waters and a baseball bat. Then I would want to say like, it's okay to be honest, because that way you're not always sitting there deciding whether or not it's okay to put yourself out there. Like getting to the point where you risk or you're vulnerable and telling the truth and all that kind of stuff is worth it. And I feel like that was one of the hardest lessons to learn. And you kind of like have to learn and relearn it, but it's very liberating when you do it. Like even the weird thing about the podcast is it's not like I can apply for something and then show up and pretend I don't have opinions on something.
Right. It's all laid out there.
How liberating is it to actually not know that there's no reason you can pretend to be naive about something as a minister, because it might be a little edgy for them because it's all there.
It's all out there.
So you could probably just be yourself. It's not the worst thing to be. And then be honest about the stuff you're carrying, because surprisingly humans actually are nice most of the time and will help you versus shame you for doing it.
Wow.
Good.
Beautiful. Tripp Fuller, you rule. Thank you for being here.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Tripp.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye-bye.
Creativity.